Hi, everybody. This is the Hungry Math Professor here, and thank you for coming to my channel. And today I'm discussing a novel called The Fall by Albert Camus. The Fall was published in 1956. It's the last book that we have from Camus. In 1957, he gets the Nobel Prize in Literature. And then, unfortunately, in 1960, he dies in a car crash. So we didn't get to see like what his mature work would have looked like. And what a shame because his books are so great to read and so thought-provoking. But this is what we have. So The Fall is the last book that he wrote during his life. Um, and the title The Fall is referring to the biblical story in the Garden of Eden. The book opens up in Amsterdam, and for this character in Camus, Amsterdam's going to represent hell in some way, though maybe we're supposed to invert how we think of hell at some point. But he says, like there's this sort of circular um, pattern in Amsterdam that kind of leads to the red light district, which is somehow the very center of hell or something. But there's also this bar called Mexico City where the main character hangs out and drinks gin and likes to tell stories and interact with people. And then the only other setting for the book is when he tells stories of when he used to live in Paris, and Paris represents the Garden of Eden for this character. And so we should remind ourselves of the story of the Garden of Eden. So God makes Adam and Eve and puts them in the Garden of Eden and tells them not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And skipping through some of the details, at some point they do eat an apple from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what happens right away is they recognize that they are naked and they want to clothe themselves, right? So but they were naked the whole time, right? And they knew they were naked in a sense, right? It's not like they couldn't see their nakedness. So what does it mean to know that they were naked? There was somehow a shame involved, a judgment involved in being naked, now having the knowledge of good and evil. And the metaphor is that you can never go back to where you were before, right? So for the character in the book, he tells the time that he's in Paris, and during this whole time, he seems to be genuinely, completely happy. And it's as he's telling the story of his life, it's not so much that we would see this character as a really good, noble character per se, but the character sees himself that way, right? So I should say the way this book works, there's one main character, Jean-Baptiste Clement, who Clemens, who is just narrating a story to you the whole time, and he seems to be talking to some character, but we don't get the dialogue from that supposed other character directly. We get it indirectly from Jean-Baptiste, first person sort of narration. So, it makes you feel like maybe at the end, like you're supposed to be somehow inculcated as the other character. That actually makes a lot of sense. There's some other theories I'll give you later, but I think it certainly makes you feel like he's talking to you in a certain sense, which is interesting. And so, as he's telling the story of his time that he spent in Paris, he's telling you how he was a lawyer and he um, he wasn't like a completely awful person, but he also wasn't like a upstanding citizen either. He would do all kinds of like intentionally good acts, like helping blind people across the road. But then when he would get to the other side, he would like make sure that people like saw that he had done it, even though like he would wave or something or bow, even though the blind person couldn't see this gesture. He wasn't doing it for the blind person. He was doing it for everyone else, right? So he was this kind of person that knew how to play the game in his eyes and like knew how to appease everybody else, and he thought he was loved by everybody else, and thought he was just having, just doing such a great thing in life. And he doesn't seem to have ever had the experience of feeling like judged by anyone else or like that what he was doing was wrong. Okay, but at some point along the way, he gets into this accident where he gets punched by someone. We don't need to go through all the details. I'm just giving you an overview. And this somehow has a big effect on him because it's like the first time that he feels some kind of shame or judgment. And after that, he starts hearing laughter. And it's not clear if he's actually hearing the laughter of people, or if it's just like a laughter in his head, which represents, again, like when he eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he feels shame for the first time. Like this laughter in his head seems to be like the first time he's ever experienced shame or judgment about his actions. And he starts to realize that, not everyone does think he's doing great things. And maybe probably not everyone likes him, or not everyone, there's all kinds of judgment that he somehow missed in the previous parts of his life. And this sends him on a spiral. Um, and he keeps narrating for you a sequence of different like attempts that he takes to try and recover from this. So um, like one of the things he attempts is to like just go lean into debauchery and getting drunk all the time and just like frivolous relationships with women. And he particularly picks out like women who are desperate, who just really think, and he just like gives them what they want as far as like telling them that he loves them or so on and so forth. And then he gets from them what he wants. Um, but it doesn't seem like this is bringing him much joy. Like it's like desperate. He's constantly reminded of his um the fact that his life will be finite, that he'll die someday, and he's looking for some kind of immortality project to live beyond the grave. And this like drinking himself to oblivion and just sleeping with all these women for no good reason is somehow an attempt to not see that he's going to die, or somehow in those moments of power, he feels invincible and some kind of like immortal, even though he knows he's not. But at some point, like he talks about how he just became like more and more numb. Like the more you drink and do all this crazy stuff, the more you cauterize the wounds of caring about these things. And so he moves on from this like debauched lifestyle. And there's maybe like two other attempts he tries to explain about things he tried to do to overcome this predicament that he's in. But at the end, so I should say, actually, in the very beginning of the book, he tells this other person he's talking to, whether it's us or some other character in the book or whatever, he tells them that what he's found as a solution is that he's a judge penitent. And he doesn't quite tell you what that is until the end, but he's really building towards telling you what it means to be a judge penitent. And so what he reminds you is, you're constantly being judged by everyone. Now that he's eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he's aware of the fact that he's constantly being judged by other people, and he constantly can judge other people as well. And he doesn't like this judgment. He wants to find a way to avoid it. And his idea is to become a penitent, meaning he's going to confess to other people like all the terrible things he's done in his life. And you realize that that's what he's been doing in the book. He's been confessing to us the story of his life and all these terrible things that he did, and he's giving us a glimpse inside of his head and what he was thinking about and what was going on during all that. But the reason why he does that is because by confessing all these things to you, now you become inculcated into his story, and he thinks that now you will also feel that judgment on your own actions. You'll also like feel a desire to confess your own like sins and things like that. And now he becomes the judge over both of us. Like he's able to assume this position of power over you because he's brought you into his game of confession. Now, here's where I find several different ways of interpreting this. And let me just give you a little like meta philosophy on how I think of novels and art in general. When I look at a piece of art, like let's say a painting is a good example, there's so little given to you there, as opposed to like some treatise by Kant or something, right? When I'm looking at a piece of art, it's beautiful. And I could try to ask, what did this artist mean by it? And I might try to do that, but I prefer to free myself from that question and just say, what does this make me feel? What do I like here? And let it just spark a conversation. Now, a novel gives you more than a painting as far as like direct evidence to try to build what the artist was trying to say with the novel. But I prefer to take this same approach with novels as well. Yes, I'm trying to figure out what Camus is trying to say, but I'm not so worried if I get it wrong if I find something interesting, right? If I find something that I find interesting from this novel, then who cares if I got it right? The novel still served its purpose. I'm reading it because I want to find new ideas. I want to be exposed to new points of view, so on and so forth. And I do think this book has done that for me. Whether or not it's exactly what Camus wanted, that's the plight of the artist. They can't control what I take from their piece of art, right? So this is my little meta philosophy. So at the end, I can see a few ways of taking this. One way, and I also discussed this with my philosophy discussion group this morning, so they put some ideas in my head. So not all these ideas are my own to begin with, but I am filtering them through my point of view and sharing them with you. So one way to think about this is that this main character has seen the frivolousness of his own like actions, like these immortality projects or this debauchery that he tries to go into. Like that's not going to answer this question, right? Again, the existentialism are always wrestling with the death of God, the loss of any objective standard to use to evaluate one's actions opposed to other people's actions. And I think in this book, you should see the fall from the Garden of Eden, not so much in the strict biblical sense, but in realizing the death of God, like realizing that the only judgment can come from others. But also, I think the further realization is that even that judgment is not worth much because where is that judgment coming from? Like, what standard is being used to produce that judgment? Okay, if that's the way you feel, if this character gets to that sort of like, inner ring of hell, where I think of hell in this case as being not not the way that maybe the Bible would think about it as being this absolutely awful place, but almost there's like a type of enlightenment there where you see the absurdity of everything for how it really is. And that doesn't give you any kind of transcendent, afterlife or anything like that, but it brings a kind of potential peace and empowerment in the sense of just seeing how things really are, like a certain plainness to life comes apparent. If that's the case, then you have two options of how to see what the judge penitent is trying to do. By confessing his sins to you and getting power over you, he could be deciding how you should be judged because he's creating a narrative for you about how the world should be. And now that you've entered into my narrative, I get to judge you. That's one way of seeing it, which I think is compelling. If there is no objective standard that comes from outside of us, then the only place that I could pretend where I can create a standard is from my own self. And the only way that that standard matters is whether you buy into my standard. And if I can get you to buy into my standard, then I get to judge you and I get some kind of power over you. I think this is a very reasonable way to read what Camus is, what this character represents, and somehow it's the only answer to the death of God is to. I mean, you could just kind of kill yourself and end it, and that's not so bad in this point of view because it's all meaningless at the end anyway. But if you're not the kind to want to do that, then you might as well make meaning for yourself from within. And the only way that if you can do that by yourself, then then you don't need anyone else. But if you want other people to be involved, and most humans are social in that way, then you have to get other people to buy into your story, buy into your version of meaning, right? And so the judge penitent you could see as um, entrancing you into this his confession so that you will buy into his point of view, and now he can judge you from the standard by which he has set upon himself and set upon you. I think that's a very reasonable way to read this. And the way I read the ending is he feels somewhat, um, it's like this tension because it's not like realizing that makes him feel really great about life because realizing that, um, is rather depressing. It would be better if he could just go back to the Garden of Eden, go back to Paris when he just thought everybody was a big fan of him. But at the same time, I don't see it as like a deep like depression where he's like it's a kind of depression where he's able to realize the the absurdity of things and the lack of meaning, and accept it and find a way forward and somehow just kind of like enjoy the best he can moving forward. So he says how he's like constantly sitting in this bar and waiting for new people to become his accomplices. Accomplices in what? Accomplices in his version of the story, right? In his version of what is when he confesses to you and you buy into what he's saying enough to confess back to him, then you have become his accomplice and you are a part of um, his way of seeing the world, right? And so that's all he can do is to try to convert as many people as he can. He doesn't seem interested in literally trying to convert everyone. He's happy just to sit in Mexico City and wait for people to come by who seem like good targets, and it's not clear if this is like a sinister act per se, but it's just a it's what he likes to do now, right? Now that he's seen what these other things amount to, he likes to sit in this bar and confess to people until they feel compelled to confess back to him. I guess what's implied there again is that they're confessing relative to the standards which Jean-Baptiste has set for them, and so now he becomes the judge, and he gets to retain them. What are we supposed to make of this? I'm not so sure, but it does seem to fit for me in the existentialist theme of, God is dead, and now what do we do about it? And there's lots of big biblical imagery. He talks about Christ along the way dying on the cross, and oftentimes we say Christ died for our sins, like everybody else's sins. But he points out that, well, no, Jesus had to die for his own sins too, because just think about the Old Testament. There's all kinds of terrible things that happen. God kills all kinds of people. That doesn't seem like a good reason for doing that. Like he seems to be saying like the Old Testament is full of all kinds of awful things. Like if you think the things I'm testifying to are bad, I mean, there's all kinds of terrible things in the Old Testament. So God needs to confess as well. And of course, he's not really trying to put up Christianity as an alternative in any way. He's using the metaphor to tell a different story. So, God has to confess his sins as well, which is interesting. Also, his name is similar to John the Baptist, which was pointed out to one of my discussion members too. And so at the end, it's like he is this sort of he's like a John the Baptist character who is baptizing you into his faith, into his way of seeing the world. And it's interesting, right? Like and another thing that was pointed out to me is it's very like Nietzschean in this idea of like the Übermensch becoming a god for oneself, creating your own system of morality that you impose on other people. I think this is one way of seeing it. Now let me offer one more way. I think the first way is completely reasonable. That was pointed out to me by another member of my discussion group that I really like, which is at the very end, it seems like he's talking to you, or it seems like he's talking to this character at the bar. But one other way of reading it is that actually he was talking to himself the whole time. And one reason for thinking that is there's two reasons for thinking that. For one, at the very end, when he's talking to this character through this like implied dialogue, he says, "Oh, you're a lawyer." Well, remember, the character, Jean Baptiste, is a lawyer himself. So by saying that this guy's a lawyer too, he could be talking about himself. And then he seems to ask this other person about an event in Paris, which seems to be the event that Jean-Baptiste was at. And so, there's some reason to think that he was talking to himself the whole entire time. If he's talking to himself the whole entire time, then this whole judge penitent thing um, sort of takes on a new meaning. It's almost like his own judgment is inside his head, and it's not even about other people. And what he is trying to convince himself the entire book is that that judgment is not warranted. Like, remember, see the absurdity of life, see the death of God, see the loss of objective standards, all this judgment that's flying around my head that comes from some kind of biological condition and evolution, everything. It's not necessary. Like this judgment is coming from some false standard. And if I can relieve myself of that judgment by causing myself to realize that it's just not real, then I can really find peace. And it seems at the very end that he does find a type of peace in just kind of like letting it be. And so, is that what the book's all about? Is about, you're so worried about other people judging you, but the only reason why their judgment is so important to you is because you allow it to become important to you, that you allow their judgment to become your judgment of yourself. And by confessing all this to yourself, you become the judge in the sense that you get to now decide how things go for yourself. I don't know. Again, I like to keep things open-ended when it comes to novels in particular, but also with philosophy, but more so with novels. I think they really lend themselves to an open-ended thing. And instead of trying to say, this is what this means, give you some kind of black and white picture, I prefer to paint tensions. This is something I'm never going to stop talking about. Let's not look for black and white truths. I've never found one. I don't even know what they are. All I find are tensions between different ideas. And in those tensions, I find a lot of value and meaning. I find them extremely interesting. And I also think that by embracing those tensions between multiple opposing ideas and points of view and not needing a final answer or some black and white solution, you become empowered into being able to embrace the uncertainty of life. So I'm going to leave it there for you. And I'm going to continue reading several more Camus books and essays. And so you'll hear more of my discussion of Camus, and perhaps it will sort of build into something more concrete moving forward. Thanks again for checking this out. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you at another video discussion.